Morning, November 2nd. Jesus before the council, Mark 14:53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power, and coming with the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, What further need do you have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. Then some began to spit on him, and to blindfold him, and to beat him, and to say to him, Prophecy. And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. Matthew 26:57. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard. And he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said to him, Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, If I put you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, He is deserving of death. Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palm of their hands, saying, Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you? Mark 14:66. Now as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, You also were with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you are saying. And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again, and began to say to those who stood by, This is one of them. But he denied it again. And a little later those who stood by Peter again, Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it. Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. The second time the rooster crowed. Then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he wept. Matthew 26:69. Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him, saying, You also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you are saying. And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him, and said to those who were there, This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And a little later, when those who stood by came up and said to Peter, Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you." Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly. Luke 22:54. Having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. Now, when they had kindled the fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them, and a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, "This man was also with him." But he denied him, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And after a little while another saw him and said, "You are also of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, "Surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." Immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So Peter went out and wept bitterly. Here's John 18. Now Simon Peter, who stood and warmed himself, therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied, and immediately a rooster crowed. Mark 15:1. Immediately in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and delivered him to Pilate. Matthew 27. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Luke 22:66. As soon as it was day, the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, came together and led him into their council, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will by no means believe. And if I also ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. Hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God." Then they all said, "Are you then the Son of God?" So he said to them, "You rightly say that I am." And they said, "What further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful, and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." And they said, "What is that to us? You see to it." Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, because they are the price of blood." And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." So, again, what I love about reading in the chronological Bible, right, is how we go through. We get to see Peter in his denial, and what's fascinating is how Luke, in chapter 22, verse 61, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Now, all four mention Peter's denial, but Luke is the only one. So if you kind of read through it and you forget, you could see how Matthew mentions it, then Mark goes through it first, then Matthew, then Luke, and John's is very quick, very short. But Luke's is the only one. It's the only gospel in verse 61 where he says, "The Lord turned and looked at Peter." We don't fully know, but it's safe to assume that where he was positioned to the outer courtyard, he could probably just have, like, if you can imagine, like a glimmer, almost like a tunnel, if you will, a vision, line of sight to see directly to Peter. And it was probably, obviously, God's timing and perfection that he could just kind of look up and get eye contact with Peter right in that moment. He was probably not within earshot, but he probably could see and make eye contact with that in that moment, and just give him a look of disappointment, but also love and grace and mercy in that moment. Like, hey, dude, you just denied me 3 times. I told you that was going to happen. And then he looks at him, and it says, Luke says, Peter remembered the word of the Lord, and he went out and wept bitterly. Right? He had just denied him. But then what ends up happening? Right? Peter comes back, asks for forgiveness. We can all do it. We can all ask for forgiveness. Although he denied Christ 3 times, right? For eternity, we all know that he denied Christ 3 times. He then becomes the father of the modern day church, and Judas hangs himself, right? Christ can forgive us at any point in our lives. Don't forget that. I love you guys. And then lastly, a quick little nugget here in Matthew 27. Now, in Matthew 27, right, verse 10, Matthew 27, verse 10, it says, they use them to buy the potter's field, right? Verse 9. Then they, spoken by Jeremiah, the prophet, was revealed, right? So, some say that Matthew made a mistake. Others say an error was made by a later scribe. Still others suggest that Matthew combined Jeremiah 19, 1 through 13, or Jeremiah 8, 2 through 12, or 32, 6 through 9, with Zechariah's statement, but attributed it to be Jeremiah because he was the better known prophet. So it's pretty interesting. You could do some research on your own and check it out. But love you guys. Have a great day.